Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. Welcome to the middle rounds of day two of the national finals. And just a couple more left. And we're looking forward to a great conversation. I want to thank your teacher for providing this experience to you. By the way, it's one that you will remember the rest of your life, and that's pretty remarkable. And so we look forward to a great conversation today. My name's Tom Vance, and I am a professor of education at Kansas State University, and I've been kicking around in the We the People program for 30 years now.
Hey everybody, Sean Arthurs. I'm an attorney and a teacher just south of Washington, D.C. I'm looking forward to having our chat today, and I'm rest assured it will be a shorter chat than the Big Dig.
I am Luana Davis, and I am a professor at Cumberland School of Law in Birmingham, Alabama. And how dare you invoke the Big Dig, which we all had to live through.
It is a wonderful way to get through the city of Boston now. It has done remarkable things to help, and I appreciate all of you taxpayers from across the country helping us make that happen. That's government at work at its finest.
Would you please introduce yourselves to us?
Hello, judges. We're the Massachusetts wildcard team representing the Williston Northampton School. My name is Edward Burgum.
Hi, my name is Belen Degener.
I'm Sage Friedman.
Hello, I'm Lily Bruce.
Hi, I'm Zach Landon, and this is our wonderful teacher, Mr. Gunn.
Thank you all for joining us. You are assigned question 2, which is the following. President Dwight D. Eisenhower said, "We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence by the military-industrial complex. The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist. Do you agree or disagree? Why?" What disagreements did the founders have about a standing army, and are they relevant today? To what extent should there be an international U.S. military presence? You may begin.
The United States military is one of the most controversial parts of American government. Americans disagree on crucial issues, such as the necessity of the military-industrial complex, the need for a standing army, and the purpose of the United States international military presence.
Debates over the size of the nuclear arsenal, the national security changes after 9/11, and the military expansion arise from ongoing concerns over the impact of the military-industrial complex, which comprises a network of individuals and institutions involved in the production of weapons and military technologies that the government contracts. Eisenhower coined this term in his farewell address, warning that it could promote policies that were not in the country's best interests and undermine democracy.
An example of the military-industrial complex prior to Eisenhower's farewell address was the Korean War, which set a precedent for the Cold War. While funds sustained security against the Soviet Union through containment, there was immense reliance on strong military force and technology to secure the safety of the US and Korea. The fact that America did not withdraw its troops and continued weapon production even after the war ended demonstrates that power given to the military persists because of collaboration with other corporations.
With the end of the Cold War in 1989, less importance was placed on the complex. However, the United States' involvement in the Middle East and concerns of terrorism maintain its relevance today. Post 9/11, there was a large jump in government spending on national security as more agencies got involved in security contracting. The increased participation of these private firms in national security now sustains their larger stake of federal security spending, giving them a greater influence and perpetuating Eisenhower's concern.
Prior to the military-industrial complex concerns, the founders feared the idea of a standing army as it threatened personal liberties and served as a potential vehicle for tyranny. James Madison addressed the Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia, warning them that the military force will not be safe companions to liberty, going on to detail that the means of defense against foreign danger have always been the instruments of tyranny at home.
Madison is demonstrating that in theory, a standing army is meant to protect. However, he makes an important distinction that a standing army risks being directly connected to an oppressive government. Furthermore, standing armies deny people freedom of speech at protests because of the possibility of violence. This fear of violent tyranny was exemplified through the Boston Massacre, which demonstrated the power of a standing army to the colonists.
This argument remains relevant today through the police and military response to the Black Lives Matter movement. Black citizens are currently being subjected to unethical use of force due to their race. An example of this is when former President Trump called for reinforcement of armed officials to a peaceful BLM protest. The excessive use of force echoes the concerns of the founders, that a standing army may be a vehicle for tyranny. Likewise, the Stonewall riots were triggered by common raids on gay bars in which police used excessive force.
While the U.S.'s international military presence is imperative because of its prominent role in global peacekeeping, it can also be detrimental. This was made possible because of President James Monroe's address in 1823, which outlined the U.S. authority to police other nations in an attempt to end imperialist colonization and puppet monarchies. This doctrine was seen in 1865 during the War of Reform in Mexico and again during the Vietnam War. However, the U.S. involvement in Vietnam had detrimental impacts on both groups of people, including genetic defects in Vietnam and high U.S. inflation due to the refusal to raise taxes.
It is important to keep peace between countries with a proper balance of military presence overseas. Washington famously said that they, the United States, should with sincerity and good faith adopt and pursue a conduct and friendly and impartial toward the belligerent power, urging the nation to rebuild itself before becoming involved with other nations. The U.S. military power has at times been harmful, but their international role as humanitarian aid is beneficial.
Operation Ace Guard, in which NATO deployed assets to stop Iraqi forces, and Operation Allied Goodwill, in which relief packages were delivered to Russia and Turkey, both highlight this. Likewise, U.S. aircraft's airlifting relief packages were an indispensable lifeline to East Berlin following World War II. This non-combative use of the military is an example of how a standing force can affect a conflict positively for the U.S. without the cost of battle. Thank you, judges. We are now ready to answer your questions.
Thanks, y'all. Let's pick up on something that you highlighted a couple of times, or it was raised several times, the military role and the Black Lives Matter, some of the protests that happened last summer. So as you know, about 12 miles from where I live is the White House, and just north of there was Lafayette Square, where President Trump appeared after clearing out some protesters. There were several military officials, including the head general of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, who appeared in a picture with Trump after clearing out Lafayette Square. Was this a good idea or a bad idea, and why do you think that for this head general to appear in this photo with Trump?
I believe that this was not a good idea because it further exemplifies how the military has been involved in this police response to the Black Lives Matter movement, including calling in the National Guard. And I think that it aligns the military values with President Trump's ideas of the sort of harmful activities that he believes the Black Lives Matter protests had.
I would actually add on to that also. I think what that really shows, there was an apology issued, and what it was trying to say is the military shouldn't be involved in domestic politics. And I think taking that picture is highlighting a role that the military should not be taking on.
This also divides the country because that's why it's bad, because there are sides who think that the U.S. military is now in works with Trump and is on their side to go against these protests, which causes distrust in them.
Following the insurrection at the Capitol on January 6th, Donald Trump was seen to have been invoking violence within his supporters. So an example of this would be the police shootings of Michael Brown, and then following that within the SWAT teams going into the Ferguson riots. We have to think about how the effect of the military and the strong police aggressive response can affect our society and our ability to protest safely.
Okay. Thank you for that. And I know I deliberately had us focus there, and we talked about an example last summer. I'd like to ask you to think broader and about when can the military say no to the commander-in-chief? So if the commander-in-chief says you need to do this to the military officer, are there any circumstances where a military officer should say, no, I will not go along with that order? Is that ever permissible?
Yeah, actually, there's a really great example. President Trump actually tried to use the nuclear warheads that he has access to as the commander-in-chief of the army. And the military personnel standing by told him, no, you cannot use those. And that's an example of where an officer used their best judgment of whether this weapon should be employed or not. And of course, Trump took offense to that, and what followed were several questions. I think that person was questioned and further vetted as to whether or not they made the right decision.
In addition to that, we can look to Congress's power to declare war as an important differentiation between what powers the president has in war and with the military as the commander in chief, versus what powers Congress has to declare war, and if those powers extend to ending war, such as the recent example of President Biden pulling out troops from Afghanistan.
And then if we look at a little bit of a later example, in 1975, Congress refused President Ford's request to increase aid in South Vietnam, and in doing so, it effectively ends the war, and that's a way Congress can become involved without explicitly saying no.
In President Eisenhower's speech that that's the source of this question, he also said only an alert and knowledgeable citizenry can get the right balance between the industrial military complex and security and liberty. How can we create a alert and knowledgeable citizenry about the military, given the amount of secrecy that surrounds its activities?
Well, I think first we have to start with education, since there's so much different, like differences between, say, public school and private school. And some people only have the option of going to public school where they don't get as much information about government, as well as maybe not as much access to media, which also can be a little dicey because there's so many different sources that are biased. So I think we also need to tackle the biased media as well.
I think that while we don't know the specifics of what's happening, we can generally surmise what is happening in foreign military affairs overseas. The Korean War, the Vietnam War, Americans protested against these conflicts. And I think that that general protesting and free speech in general lets us voice our concerns about what the commander-in-chief is doing in conflicts overseas.
A key example of this would be our conflict with Saudi Arabia and the way that we are allied with them. But following the assassination of Khashoggi, we have a large ideological conflict here. And that while we do need oil from Saudi Arabia, and we are scared that because of the necessity of them to check Irani's power, we also need to be aware of our large ideological differences with them as a nation. And the citizens need to be aware of how our governmental system is handling that.
Let's turn our attention back to the use of military force. Under what circumstances is the president, in your view as a citizen, is the president justified in using military force, whether that's troops or missiles or whatever, not just a presence, but actual use of military force in a combative way? When is the president justified, under what circumstances, if ever, in doing that without congressional approval?
So a key example of this would be during the Cuban Missile Crisis, in which Cuba was allied with the Soviet Union, and the Soviet Union was trying to bring in military forces into Cuba, and we set up naval blockages to stop this. And that's important because in order to protect the spread of communism and also the spread of the Soviet Union, that was indicative for the protection of the US.
And then also in Libya in 2011, when the Libyan civil war broke out, the United States military was aiding the anti-graffiti rebels with airstrikes against the army. And the reason they did this was to advance democracy within Libya. And I think that's when it's justifiable, because the purpose of democracy is a key ideal of the American government.
So if advancing democracy is one, what's another place when it's justified to use military force without congressional approval?
I would say that in the Civil War, when Lincoln used the army without the congressional approval first as an executive action, that was a good example of when that was important. And he actually set a big precedent for future US presidents in being able to use that during a national or international crisis.
So I'm wondering when we should separate the military system of justice and civilian system of justice.
Sorry.
I will have to keep wondering that myself.
Well, Unit 6, wow, excellent work, great job. Yes, Mr. Gunn, thumbs up, claps, cheers, lots of different kinds of emojis. So yeah, what an extraordinary job of analyzing in both in your prepared remarks and also in follow-up questions, the use of military power and the constitutional basis of authority. And it was just, you just did a very nice job. I also liked, the fact that you just recognized that this whole area on its face is controversial. And I like that approach to this question, and actually lots of questions. And by doing that, you're recognizing that there are multiple sides to an issue, which in this day and age of polarization and so forth, it's so refreshing to hear people say, yeah, there are multiple perspectives on this thing. And I really like that. In terms of my question towards the end, that's a tough question. And I pushed you on when presidents should be able to do that. Obviously, one of the first areas people would say is when we're under direct attack, right? The president should be able to use a military force. And your idea about democracy is a good one. But even more important than democracy as a system of government is probably the idea of rights, protecting human rights and individual rights is probably a more prominent, I would think, American value. We also support democracy. Don't get me wrong. Democracies don't go to war with one another, all that line of thinking. But I thought it was a really strong performance. And, it makes me happy that we have young people that know so much about this issue and a whole bunch of others too, by the way. Good work.
Yeah, thank you, team. I have to say, particularly enjoyed some of your examples, some that we hadn't heard yet today, including, around Stonewall and the Boston Massacre. I thought those were creative examples. My one suggestion for you might be to think, instead of going straight to the example, if you can abstract to a principle, right? And it's kind of like what my colleague, Professor Vance, was saying, they're abstract to the principle around when we're under direct attack. Like you talked about the Cuba situation, you talked about different times, for example, when we can use military force. If you can abstract to a principle, that sometimes is more helpful, right? And like I could tell you're thinking about it and the examples jump right up and you're like, oh, I recognize this. But thinking about if you can go to a broader principle, sometimes that's a little bit helpful and demonstrates your understanding. So best of luck. And I'm glad this was not as painful as the Big Dig.
Agreed with my colleagues, and just a great performance. I would say regarding citizen awareness, think about some of the ways that we have tried to formalize citizen awareness. For example, citizen review boards, or bringing the military before Congress and requiring them to answer questions about what they are doing. Because you raise a lot of excellent points about when the military goes astray. Who is it that is going to check them, right? Who is it that even knows enough to do anything to them? And that's where I think that part of where I think President Eisenhower was going was, listen, if people don't know, then they can't do anything about it. But outstanding job. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, judges. We appreciate that.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.